on Passover, since it's coming up in just a few days. So let's first join in the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who commands us to study, engage in Torah. I tried to convince my oldest daughter, who's at work with me, to come and help teach, but she declined. So she's in the other room, but it is nice to have my daughter at work with me, which I actually think is very much in line with one of the most important parts of the Seder experience, which is the next generation. So I do want to be a little bit more interactive today. I do have some text that I want us to look at, but I also do want to give the space for us to discuss and ask questions, because the truth is, whether it's about Passover or anything, I feel like it's always good to have one session where we can just potentially open the gates on any kinds of questions we should be asking. And we are going to look at a passage, a couple pages about the art of questions, because I think that's a really key part too. But one of the most important pieces is this idea from generation to generation that Passover is the moment in which we literally eat our history. I just did an exercise with our 5th and 6th graders here at Browerman East, and I asked them to imagine their own Seder plate. And after we reviewed the various symbols that go on the traditional Seder plate, the shank bone and what it represents, and the egg and the karpas and charoset and maror and matzah, etc., I said, well, if you had to create your own Seder plate with symbols that represented your story, so that in 3 or 4 generations from now, people would be able to know your story through the symbols on the Seder plate, what would it be? Because I was thinking about that would be good for all of us to do, right? Because what we've done with that Seder plate is truly figure out a way, in a very succinct, symbolic way, to really tell our entire narrative, this Exodus narrative, which is the key narrative of the Jewish people, right? Genesis really is just the precursor and the preamble for Exodus, which is the main narrative of the Jewish people. Everything is built around that story, right? The true, we have the book of Exodus, when we have the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy to a degree, which in many ways Deuteronomy is just a retelling of things that came before. So 2 out of the 5 books are dedicated to the narrative of that actual journey. 1 book is dedicated to retelling everything that happened in those 2 books of that journey. That only leaves 1 book, Leviticus, which really delves into the details of creating a holy society. And then we have the preamble book, which is Genesis. So we really do have the majority of the Torah based on the Exodus narrative and that journey. So I'm curious if I'll just ask all of you the same question that I asked these kids. Oh, this goes back to, before we do that, what came out with many of these young students who, of course, have not had a tremendous amount of life experience yet. They talked about family, and a lot of them talked about food, and a lot of them also put the Jewish star as one of their symbols, which is a good sign, because they're going to Jewish day school. If by 5th and 6th grade they're not doing that, we've missed the mark. So to see that and some of them said Browerman, their school, their day school experience, but food seems to be a really key way in which these kids were explaining their own story, and how food is a really key piece of how they define themselves, which is really interesting. And if you think about what our tradition did thousands of years ago, it used food as the introduction to telling a story, that it's through the eating of all of these symbols that we actually tell the story, which is just a brilliant educational strategy to use, and works very well with children, which is really the focus of the Seder, right? The Seder is supposed to be guiding us to prepare the next generation, that if we can get it into their brains and in their minds and into their soul, that this is the way in which you tell a story, is by gathering around a table and literally eating elements of that story. Once you do that, that gets ingrained, and then it gets passed down. So it's a really brilliant technique that is used. Yeah, David, did you want to say something?
Yes. One issue that comes up, we have for many years invited some friends who are non-Jewish, and then when our son went to SC and he lived on campus, but some of his friends or roommates were from out of town, and we invited them also. But so the people who have not been Jewish, I felt a little uncomfortable explaining like the plagues and other things. And I get it why, God did it, and Pharaoh, and he was stiff-necked and everything, but it seems a bit, I'm not going to say harsh, because the Pharaoh, the Egyptian, whether it's a myth, factual, or whatever, but it just sounds kind of and killing of the firstborn. And I get it, Pharaoh, wanted to kill all the males and everything like that. But any suggestions about that, without going into a whole quote unquote Megillah end quote about why the Jews were persecuted and all, and this is what occurred. So I've just felt that way and I love to have, it's a mitzvah to have people at your Seder, and especially non-Jews, and they've never said anything, per se, and they enjoy getting together with the family. Any thoughts?
Well, can you dig a little deeper into what element of telling those 10 plagues is what makes you uncomfortable? What is it about that?
Killing of the firstborn.
Okay. And you think that puts us as Jews in a bad light? Is that what your concern is?
A little, I think a little bit. I mean, because killing of the firstborn, the Egyptians, obviously the Pharaoh, and then his people who were with him, and then the people who were enslaving, the Hebrews, that was terrible, horrific, etc. But killing the firstborn of all the of every Egyptian, every non-Hebrew there seemed gives me a little uncomfort. And I understand why it was done, of course, but explaining it is something else.
Yeah, no, it's great. Rebecca seems to have a response, so I'll give it to Rebecca, and then Penina also has afterwards.
Yeah, I agree with David, because I think that in derogatory terms, sometimes people call Jews baby killers, because not only does it was the Pharaoh thing, there was also child sacrifice.
Well, which we did not do, by the way. I mean, the main thing that actually differentiated the Jews from other societies, ancient societies, is that if we go back to the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, which we tell on the high holidays, that was revolutionary in the sense that the Jews became a group of people who did not do child sacrifice, while many others around them were. So I just want to clarify that the Israelite society did not do human sacrifice and child sacrifice. That was a differentiator.
I thought it continued until Leviticus.
No,
Okay.
there's nothing in the Torah that shows Israelites killing their children for sacrifices to God. There's plenty of killing that goes on, right? And Cain kills his brother Abel, but that's not as a sacrifice to God, and they're not even considered monotheists at that point in the Torah, right? Because they're so early on. Okay, yes. So Penina, you also have a response to David? Nope, you're muted still.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, well, we had the story right before that Pharaoh ordered all the baby boys to be thrown and to be killed as soon as they are born. So is that story not getting the ground ready for like a payback that would be exactly what he did, what he ordered his people to do to the Jewish boys, to throw them and kill them and keep the girls?
No,
sometimes the girls became, later on they believed that women were actually the goddesses, or the ones that were like doing the rituals, I guess, or the one who will give birth to whatever. So I think it was tit for tat, the way you said. It's like, if they can understand that, why can't they understand that their babies will be, put to death?
Okay, that's
I mean, we are people, and
I don't think
the
that
reaction,
would make
the reaction is very, it's like payback. That's it.
Yeah, that again, that's another way. David, I assume that's not how you would want to probably
Yes, because the idea, no, I get it. And
Right.
we wanted to show Pharaoh that, that we're going to just wipe do this to your whole thing, including your own son. I get it. But what I'm
Pharaoh
saying,
himself was a firstborn. That was the whole idea. Pharaoh himself was a firstborn.
sure,
That's why
I
he went
understand.
after the firstborns.
Sure, I understand that. And if Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and they killed Pharaoh, even though they knew they're in the courtier, and they killed him because he was the one that ordered it, I could get that, because that's killing for a good purpose, so to speak. But to kill all the firstborn of all the Egyptians, and then even the firstborn males, and firstborn, I believe also the Torah said, of animals as well. But I'm just saying it included innocent people. It's just the question I have. I get it as a Jew. I'm mentioning that at the Seder with non-Jews, how it appears. So it's a question that I've struggled with, but
we had to be shown as strong. Otherwise, this is the only language that they understood at the time. You had to show that our idea of this God of ours is a strong one, is the one who's going to take sides with the righteous one.
I think
the only way they'll understand is the Pharaoh himself, who was considered the God, would be taken out. That's it.
All right, Anne, and then Sydney.
Okay, a couple things. First of all, I understand what you're saying, David. I have a little bit of a different dilemma with the plagues. Mine is that I don't want them on my plate. I don't want them in my house. And there is a tradition, and I think it's a Persian tradition, although I'm not sure, about putting the plagues when you do the dipping outside. You carry it outside, and it's the only way I've been able to reconcile having the plague discussion.
Right, that's why we do it. We dip our finger and touch.
Hold on, Penina, hold on. Let her finish.
The ones that were killed,
Penina,
the ones who weren't to blame.
Penina, I just want to finish for a sec. Thank you. But to get back to your wonderful question of the kids, Rabbi, you made me think about what I would put on the plate. And someone was talking about traditions in their lives. And one of the things in my life was that I grew up and had Passovers all over the world without Jews at the table. And in Ireland, I wondered about the clover. And I felt, as you were talking, like I would put a clover on my Seder plate, because I think the discussion of luck and good fortune and blessing is a worthy discussion. And the notion of just being able to have a discussion that's uplifting at that point in the service, as we're describing the plate, has tremendous appeal to me. So I'm so glad that you did that with the kids, because I'd like to do that this year at our Seder. So thank you for that idea.
You're welcome. Thanks, Anne. Sydney.
I really liked what Anne suggested. Thank you. That whole idea of how we shape something that's really awful into something that's an opportunity. And I think David's question, addresses that. I think the discomfort, certainly I feel it as well, whether they're Jews or non-Jews there at the table, that we sort of advocate in a sense in the story. And so one way that I think about it is that it's all symbolic. And so if we put ourselves in the time that this took place and we translate it into present time, how do we take that and say there are opportunities to change behavior at every step? The ultimate outcome can be really horrible if not. And we have opportunities, and we learn this in the Torah, and we learn this in our Jewish studies. We have the opportunity each day to start anew. So how do we do that and not harden ourselves, not harden our hearts as Pharaoh did? I mean, I think that's part of the challenge, and maybe part of the discussion even for children, the children who put on their plates about food. Food is comfort. So how do we open ourselves to comfort? How do we open ourselves to open hearts, and not to retribution, but to the opportunity to change, even and seeing those whose hearts are hardened? So it's just another way maybe that I think about it.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I also think, David, I'll let Susan go first, and then I'll share my thoughts. Go ahead, Susan. Susan?
Yes, I think what Sydney brought up was very good too. And I think what David was experiencing, it's also in Jewish hearts, but it's in Christianity. You turn the other cheek kind of a thing. And sympathy then for, I get it for the innocent, but Pharaoh had no sympathy for the innocent, did he? They were innocent Jewish babies. And if you address this to your Buddhist friends, you could say karma, what comes around goes around. It's a divine retribution for Pharaoh's hardened heart. And that could be a lesson too. Look what happens when he refuses to change. The first 3 plagues, if I remember correctly, Pharaoh didn't harden his heart. He hardened his own heart. And then after that, because he was set in these ways, as Maimonides, it tells you, once you do a bad thing, you can also become accustomed to doing it. And you're hardened in that way. So that can be a lesson for hardening his heart. And what happens with that? He gets the same punishment that he was inflicting on others.
Yes.
So if you believe in justice as well as compassion, and that's one of the attributes of God, compassion and mercy and justice, then you have to see some of that as justice, even for the innocents, because the innocents get swept away in a lot of evil people's doings. So I like Sydney's suggestion about what happens with the hardening of the heart. And I like our focus also on justice as well as.
So the idea is the literal eye for an eye. I know the eye for an eye is symbolic, because there never was poking somebody's eye out if they poked out yours. Even in the Torah, from what I gather, that never actually happened. And then they did monetary compensation. I'll give you have to give a fine for an ox or something.
Right.
No, I get it. And, all of it. And God certainly could have killed Pharaoh, and even Pharaoh's Pharaoh was the firstborn, as somebody pointed out here, and even Pharaoh's own firstborn son. But again, it was the whole Egyptian people. And this probably is looking at something, I understand, 21st century viewpoint that, we always have to, I especially have to kind of divorce myself from, and then kind of look at, we're talking about something several thousand years ago.
Well,
anyways,
I think there are a couple of things that are potentially universal, right? I think those 10 plagues, which, by the way, we're not supposed to say with joy. We're not reciting those 10 plagues with joy. And there's actually a midrash that when the angels start, celebrating when the Egyptians get swallowed in the sea, God says, "Why are you celebrating? My children are dying. You shouldn't be celebrating," right? So there's also another sense that God does not like people suffering. And I think there's also this idea about the 10 plagues of that freedom comes at a cost, and that there is a significant loss of innocence, and that innocent people suffer at the hands of dictatorial leaders and those who try and oppress and hold back freedom in the world. Their power leads to innocent people becoming victims and suffering, right? So I think it's also a warning. It's as if God is punishing Pharaoh through innocent people, and that's terrible. It's also as though I see it as our tradition saying, be careful of the leaders that you have and the systems that you create in society that could potentially lead to leadership making decisions that is in their own self-interest, and as a result then impacts the innocent people in ways that are unfair, unjust, and inexplicable, right? Because it doesn't make sense. And why would God do this? And by the way, this is not the only time in the Torah where God punishes people, even innocent people, right? Korach, which we'll get to in the next book, in the book of Numbers, Korach's entire family and all of his clan get swallowed up in the ground, and they weren't the ones necessarily who stood up, right? And Moses, after he comes down and sees the golden calf, he makes everyone, drink the golden calf, and then he has his people go out and kill his brothers and sisters, right? And 7,000, I think, Israelites are killed at the hands of the Levites as punishment for the building of the golden calf. So there are many moments of disturbing, troubling elements within our tradition, and the plagues are one of them, right? And I like the Sephardic tradition of taking it out, right? And you also, as we did with the kids yesterday with the Seder with their parents, like, you're not supposed to lick your finger after you dip your finger in the wine or in the grape juice, right? Because you're not supposed to get joy from the fact that these plagues came. This is not a joyous moment. It's a reminder of the real challenge of that process of going from enslavement to freedom, and the loss that comes with that. But thank you for bringing this up, David. Really, really good. And you should bring it up with your non-Jewish guests and ask them what they think. Be interesting to say. I'm nervous to talk about this with you guys. I'm very curious how you take this as a non-Jew.
I like that suggestion.
Yeah. Since we are supposed to, we're supposed to go through the Seder, we're supposed to go through the Haggadah, but the truth is we're really supposed to be engaging in discussion and questions. I mean, that's the rabbis, ancient rabbis even talk about certain strategies that were used in order to get children to ask questions. For example, at the beginning of the Seder, where they would usually bring out some of the parts of the Seder of the Haggadah to eat, the leader would eat them, and then they take the tray away because it wasn't the meal yet. If you really think about it, we have a little bite, and then we wait, we tell a whole story, and then finally you get the meal, right? And mostly until I went to my in-laws, when I grew up at my grandfather's Seder, there was no eating until the full meal. And then I learned that actually that once you do karpas, the blessing of a karpas, you can be eating veggies all you want, because actually karpas traditionally is sometimes defined beyond parsley and to just green vegetables. So you can serve celery and other vegetables as snacks for people to be eating as you still go through the meal, so people aren't starving by the time you get to the main course. But the whole idea is they would take away that food, and then children would ask, well, why did you take away the food? And that was a question that would then lead them to answer those questions. So again, figuring out all these ways in the Seder that we were supposed to prime children and prime the next generation. And I would argue even today, there are many people who just are not living a learned Jewish life. It's almost, I would say it's not just our children anymore. It's really just to create this space. If you think about it, more than any other Jewish holiday, this is the space given for us to really try and explore our Jewish identity, our connection to Judaism, what people around the table, their interpretations. Hanukkah doesn't really give a sense of sitting around a table and doing that in a prescribed way. Shabbat doesn't really, right? Here we have a holiday that literally builds questions into an order in which you are supposed to have an experience that goes beyond a meal. There are very few, I don't think there are actually any other holidays that I can think of that are more primed to really push people, to really guide people to be asking questions of themselves and the people around the table, more so than Passover. And I think we should take advantage of that. Because I feel like there are fewer and fewer places where we do that. I mean, I was just playing around with Chat GPT earlier today, right? There are many, now you can answer lots of questions without any engagement with another individual. And Seder is going to, hopefully, God willing, for generations and generations still to come, be a place where people literally have to gather around a table and interact. Yes, now we can have people on Zoom who are also joining, but as we think about how AI and about how the world is working, I think Passover becomes more and more a centerpiece for the kind of engagement and deep discussion and exploration that is required for us to stay connected to our Judaism. Okay. Any other challenging parts of the Seder or Passover experience? That David brought up one. Any other pieces before we go on of things that when you reflect on the Seder, when you reflect on the Exodus narrative, anything that stands out as either something you're uncomfortable with, you don't understand, disagree with? Just curious. No? Okay, great. Moving on then. I wanted to show you this. This is really interesting because after Declaration of Independence in 1776, the Continental Congress asked Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin to create a design for the nation's seal. And they agreed that on the reverse of the seal, what they wanted was this. This was the symbol that they wanted to be on the seal of the United States. Now, it was not adopted. Instead, we have the seal that you find on the dollar bill with the pyramid with the all-seeing eye and towards the top there. But this, if you look closely, Moses and the Israelite people, the Egyptians drowning in the water, and the pillar of fire of God over them, right? So just very interesting that the founders of our country wanted this to be the symbol used to represent our country. So again, just a reminder that that this narrative goes much deeper and goes beyond just the Jews, right? Goes really into kind of the sense of what does freedom look like. Okay, any questions at this point? I know this is not as text-based today, but I do have a text that I would like us to look at. And we'll see, kind of want to just read it straight. I mean, I've highlighted this from a while ago, but I would love to just kind of read through some of this and see if you guys have any responses. Okay, so this is from Jonathan Sacks, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. He died a couple of years ago, an incredible thinker and rabbi from Great Britain. And this is the art of asking questions. Now, to me, I'm just fascinated by the art of asking questions. And of course, the Seder is the place, as I've mentioned, where we do that the most. And I really like how he's frames this. So I want to read a little bit, see if you have any thoughts, because I think it's important for us to keep this in mind. Again, not just at the Seder, but how do we incorporate this concept of questioning into the rest of our lives? Socrates, the great Greek philosopher and mentor of Plato, was in the habit of asking disconcerting questions. To this day, persistent questioning in search of clarity is known as the Socratic method. For this habit, among other things, he was put on trial by the Athenians, accused of corrupting the young and sentenced to death. Nothing could be less like Judaism, in which teaching the young to ask questions is an essential feature of Pesach, so much so that the Haggadah, the narration, must be in response to a question asked by a child. If there's no child present, adults must ask one another. And if one is eating alone, one must ask oneself. In Judaism, to be without questions is a sign not of faith, but of lack of depth. And the child who does not know how to ask, you must begin to teach him how. Many customs of Seder night, dipping the parsley, removing the Seder plate are two examples, were introduced solely to provoke a child to ask why. Judaism is a religion of questions. Abraham Tversky, the American psychiatrist, remembers how, when he was young, his teacher would welcome questions, the more demanding the better. When faced with a particularly tough challenge, he would say in his broken English, "You right, you 100% right. Now I show you where you were wrong." The Nobel Prize-winning Jewish physicist Isidore Rabi once explained that his mother taught him how to be a scientist. Every other child would come back from school and be asked, "What did you learn today?" But my mother used to ask instead, "Izzy, did you ask a good question today?" In the yeshiva, the home of traditional Talmudic learning. The highest compliment a teacher can give a student is, I'm not great at Yiddish, you raise a good objection. Where did it come from, this Jewish passion for questions? Clearly, it owes much to the fact that 3 times in the Torah, Moses speaks of children asking for an explanation of religious practice, and in another place it says, you shall tell your child on that day. Together, these 4 verses serve as the basis for the 4 sons of the Haggadah. Education is not indoctrination. It is teaching a child to be curious, to wonder, reflect, inquire. The child who asks becomes a partner in the learning process. He or she is no longer a passive recipient, but an active participant. To ask is to grow. I'll just read a little more. But questioning goes deeper than this in Judaism, so deep as to represent a sui generis religious phenomenon. The heroes of faith ask questions of God, and the greater the prophet, the harder the question. Abraham asked, will the judge of all the earth not perform justice? And that happens when God's about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Moses asked, O Lord, why have you brought trouble upon this people? Jeremiah said, you are always righteous, O Lord. When I bring a case before you, yet I would speak with you about your justice. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why do all the faithless live at ease? The book of Job, the most searching of all explorations of human suffering, is a book of questions asked by a man, to which God replies with 4 chapters of questions of his own. The earliest sermons, known as the Yelam Denu style type, began with a question asked of the rabbi by a member of the congregation. One classic genre of rabbinical literature is called She'elot U'Shuvot, questions and replies. Questioning is at the heart of Jewish spirituality. I'm almost done. Religious faith has often been seen as naive, blind, accepting. That is not the Jewish way. Judaism is not the suspension of critical intelligence. It contains no equivalent to the famous declaration of the Christian thinker Tertullian, certum et qua impossibile, I believe it because it is impossible. To the contrary, asking a question is itself a profound expression of faith in the intelligibility of the universe and the meaningfulness of human life. To ask is to believe that somewhere there is an answer. The fact that throughout history, people have devoted their lives to extending the frontiers of knowledge is a compelling testimony to the restlessness of the human spirit and its constant desire to go further, higher, deeper. Far from faith excluding questions, questions testify to faith, that history is not random, that the universe is not impervious to our understanding, that what happens to us is not blind chance. We ask not because we doubt, but because we believe. Thoughts, responses? Do you agree? Anything stand out? Any element? Yeah, Ben.
Well, thank you. This is kind of a home run for me, because when I think of Judaism and asking questions, so many Nobel laureates and professors and just great achievements in thought and intellect attributed to so many Jews. And then I'm going to get very personal, where sometimes I think about Christianity and this Christian nationalism that's out there. All the answers, I'm simplifying it, all the answers are in the Bible. Just go to the Bible, you get the answer. You don't have to really think, you just can listen to that preacher, and with all due respect to preaching, but they'll give you the answer to any question you have. You don't have to think about it. And by having that kind of cop out, you don't question, and you don't have the faith, like you sort of said. By having questions, you believe that there is an answer and there's a truth, not that it's just in some book. I don't know if that made a lot of sense. But...
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, great. David, then Ann, then Merle.
My wife, who converted to Judaism, both of us we promised the rabbi we'll be married 34 years this August. But anyways, and she had asked at some point when first started coming to Seders, and then afterwards, how come there's so many Jewish lawyers, or how come Jewish lawyers are so good? I'm a Jewish lawyer. I don't know how good I am, but anyway, she knew I'm a lawyer. And then I gave a pretty simplistic answer, kind of the basis of this. And I said, well, we've always asked questions and all, and we've always had to. but I'm going to keep this and give her the more thoughtful, the more deep response than mine.
Great. Thanks, David. Anne?
Well, I love Sachs's work. I am always struck by some of his questions that he asks all of us as readers. And what I loved in this passage is that his belief that somewhere there is an answer, because I think that it's so affirming of oneself to even ask a question. And and it's an optimistic thing when you say, I'm going to ask a question because I believe there is an answer. I love that. Thank you.
Great. Merle?
I'm a big believer in asking questions because you don't learn if you don't. My older granddaughter and I I pick her up at dance a lot during the weeks. It's hard for our kids to be in two places at once. And she gets in the car and she starts asking questions. And a lot of it is about my growing up with a stepfather and a biological father, and finally meeting my biological father and all that. But a lot of it runs into my growing up Jewish, growing up at camp, growing up. I mean, I don't have a problem with them asking questions because I think it's really important for them to understand where the rest of us came from and why our Judaism, she asked questions like, why were you a Jewish professional for so many years? And why did you choose to do that instead of some other profession? And I think it's, I don't know where this is going to show up in her bat mitzvah speech or something, all these questions and answers. But I feel like if she wants to know the answers so badly, which she doesn't let you get away with it, then I think Passover to me is a perfect place for these questions to come up, because there's a lot of stuff in there that none of us are ever going to really understand.
Yep. Yeah, and we have to support all those questions that are asked, right?
Yes.
Instead of shutting them down or trying to give. I mean, look, when children are very small, we're supposed to just answer questions directly and not elaborate, because when they're very young, that just doesn't work for them. But sometimes I feel like we still use the young child response to questions as they get older, as opposed to really working harder to go deep and recognize the complexity of trying to answer questions and supporting the fact that people are asking questions. That is so important. Okay, so I actually want to keep reading because I really like what Rabbi Sachs does. Is he kind of breaks down, there are three types of questions according to him, which I really like, and I'm curious if you would categorize questions in the same way or what you think about these categories. So let's keep reading a little bit more if you don't mind. There are three kinds of questions, each corresponding to a different aspect of God, humanity, and the intellectual quest. The first belongs to the sphere of chokhmah, wisdom, and includes scientific, historical, and sociological inquiry. Rashi interprets the phrase describing the creation of man in our image according to our likeness to mean with the power to understand and discern. Homo sapiens is the only being known to us capable of framing the question, why? Maimonides includes scientific and philosophical understanding as part of the commands to love and fear God, because the more we understand of the universe, the more awe-inspiring it is, and its architect reveal themselves to be, right? And I think this is a really good response to those who say, well, I believe in science and therefore I can't believe in God. And what is being said here is, well, actually, the more you understand about science, the more inspiring it is. Right, and how incredible it is, and if anything, that's even more proof that the force behind the creation of all of these incredible things is incredible itself, right? And so let's not negate the existence or potential existence of some greater force out there, but instead, by learning more about science, wow, you are maybe even getting closer to understanding the power of the divine in a way that you wouldn't if you didn't care about science. The sages coined a blessing for seeing a sage distinguished for his or her worldly knowledge. Blessed are you who has given of his wisdom to human beings. The first request we make in the daily Amidah prayer is favor us with knowledge, understanding, and insight. That's in the weekday Amidah. You don't find that in the week and the Shabbat one, because you're not supposed to ask for anything during Shabbat. So you have to go to the weekday to find that one. Human dignity is intimately related to our ability to fathom the workings of the universe, natural and social. Chokhmah is an encounter with God through creation. Making man in his image, the creative God endowed mankind with creativity. Second are the questions we ask about the Torah, right? So the first ones were about scientific, historical, and sociological inquiry, wisdom questions. Now this is about the Torah. Like the four that open the Seder. Why is this night different? Why do we do this, not that? What is the reason for the law? It is one of the most striking features of biblical Hebrew that though the Torah is full of commands, 613 mitzvot, as we know, there is no biblical word that means obey. Instead, the Torah uses the word Shema, meaning hear, listen, reflect on, internalize, and respond. God wants not blind obedience, but understanding response. Right. And again, I think this goes back to Ben's comment about the difference between kind of a Christian faith understanding of Torah and of our relationship with God versus a Jewish one. Right. There, in no way does God seem to expect us to be blindly obedient. And if God did, we clearly would be disappointing in how we make our way through the Torah itself. Right. But according to kind of the Jewish way of seeing it, and if you think about Shema, what I also love about this is that this brings yet another kind of understanding to the phrase Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, right? It's not necessarily a command. You need to listen, everyone. There's one God. There's only one way to do things. It's more about what does it mean to internalize the idea of oneness or one God or unity. That's kind of a force behind the Shema prayer itself. Moses tells the Israelites that the commands are their wisdom and understanding in the eyes of the nation, implying that they are amenable to human reason. In one of the historic moments of adult education, Ezra, returning from Babylon, assembles the people in Jerusalem and reads publicly from the Torah with the assistance of Levites, whose task was to make it clear and explain the meaning so that the people could understand what was being read. By the way, this is what this idea of Ezra reading from the scroll publicly is what led to the idea of us with the public reading of the Torah on Mondays, Thursdays, and on Saturdays. Those are the days that traditionally read Torah, and those were the days where people would gather publicly. Of course, Shabbat is a little different, but those other 2 days were market days where people would gather together. And so if you're going to share the Torah, you're not supposed to do it in the privacy of your own home. If you want to create an ethos of a value system and of people having a shared responsibility for what's in that text, you have to do it when people are all together. The saintly Hillel, known for his gentleness to all, nonetheless said, an ignorant person cannot be pious. The more we ask, search, and understand the Torah, the better we can internalize its values and apply them to new situations. The Torah is a meeting with God in revelation. And finally, undoubtedly, though, the most unique of Judaism's questions and the one most associated with the prophetic tradition is about justice. Why bad things happen to good people? Why evil seems so often to triumph? Why there is so much undeserved suffering in the world? Karl Marx once called religion the opium of the people. He believed that it reconciled them to their condition, their poverty, disease, and death, their station in life, their subjugation to tyrannical rulers, the sheer bleakness of existence for most people most of the time. Faith anesthetized. It made the otherwise unbearable bearable. It taught people to accept things as they are because that is the will of God. Religion, he argued, was the most powerful means ever devised of keeping people in their place. It spread the aura of inevitability over arbitrary fate. So, argued Marx, if the world is to be changed, religion must be abandoned. And by the way, I think we all know about people who kind of still hold on to this idea of religion being the opium of the people. Nothing could be less true of Judaism. Okay, so this is a nice response if anyone comes at you with, well, religion is just there to keep people back or hold them in their place. The faith born when God liberated a people from the chains of slavery. The question that echoes through the history of Judaism, from Abraham to Jeremiah to Job to rabbinic midrash to medieval lament to Hasidic prayer, is not acceptance of, but a protest against injustice. There are some questions to which the response is an answer, but there are other questions to which the response is an act. To ask, why do the righteous suffer, is not to seek an explanation that will reconcile us to the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. It is to turn to God with a request for action and to discover, in the very process of making the request, that God is asking the same of us. There are three scenes in Moses' early life. He sees an Egyptian attacking an Israelite, and he intervenes. He sees two Israelites fighting, and he intervenes. He sees non-Israelite shepherds mistreating the non-Israelite daughters of Yitro, and he intervenes. To be a Jew is to be prepared to act in the face of wrongdoing. When Rabbi Chaim of Brisk was asked, what is the role of a rabbi? He replied, to redress the grievances of those who are abandoned and alone, to protect the dignity of the poor, and to save the oppressed from the hands of their oppressor. Judaism is God's question mark against the random cruelties of the world. It is his call to us to mend the world until it becomes a place worthy of the divine presence, to accept no illness that can be cured, no poverty that can be alleviated, no injustice that can be rectified. To ask the prophetic question is not to seek an answer, but to be energized to action. That is what it is to meet God in redemption. He's awesome. Right? Amazing. And I put it in the chat so you can all take it and kind of digest it as well. But so he breaks it down into three questions, right? The types of questions. One about wisdom, history, philosophy, sociology. The second kinds of questions are about the Torah, kind of a deeper understanding of what is our story, what is our narrative. And then the third type of question he's saying is about justice. And how do we respond to justice? So responses to any of those questions or anything that stood out from anything that Rabbi Sachs writes that resonated with you, or that allowed you to see things a little differently or reinforced something that you already believed. Yeah, Merle?
I think this goes back to how you do mitzvot, how you respond to justice, that you don't wake up every morning and say, okay, what am I going to do good today? It's supposed to just happen. You're not supposed to think about it. You're supposed to just do it. And I think with the world and the condition that it's been in and continues to be in, that's something we have to focus on as much as possible, especially for our children. I mean, I said something the other day about every time I drive by a school, I get this stomach ache about what's been going on. And I still have that feeling. And I feel like I'm driving by schools intentionally because I feel like I need to make a statement.
Wow. Yeah, and I would just add, when we wake up, it's not only what am I going to do today? It's almost as though what do I want to respond to today?
Right.
What is going on in the world or in my own life that I want to respond to? Right. It's an active response that at least Rabbi Sachs seems to be arguing that the way in which we approach justice and the questions we have to ask are, we really have to be asking ourselves, what role am I going to play in response to things that actually are almost impossible to truly understand, and they're unfathomable and they're terrible. But what we can control is what we're going to do about it, how we respond. David.
This reminds me of the popular book that came out, I don't know how many years ago, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, because the other question, why we can go on and forever and ever from the Egyptian slavery to the Holocaust and everything over the past several thousand years to Job as well. And so I think that book, and I don't remember all of it, and I don't even remember who wrote it. Maybe I don't remember if it was
Harold
a rabbi.
Kushner.
Was that Schulweiss?
No,
Oh.
Kushner, Harold Kushner.
I meant Kushner, right.
Okay, but anyways, I think that gets to what the section that you just read about. And it's interesting.
Great, thanks. Yeah, Pamina.
What's going, okay. I think we had an answer, the 10 Commandments. That's why the whole Torah was to show you all the struggles and everything that gave birth to the 10 Commandments. Those were the guidelines that they learned from all the other stuff that was happening. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, yes, and I would say what the Jewish way in which we weren't satisfied with even just those 10 commandments, because then we created the Mishnah and the Talmud.
Okay, but
to
still there was
extrapolate on this,
guidelines
right?
that were born out of experience, out of
Yes.
seeing everything that was happening and try to correct all this. So we have a base, otherwise the Torah wouldn't be called the Torah. It's a teaching book.
You're right.
So
We absolutely have the base, and built
That's
it
it.
into
And
the
we
base.
have to work on that, yeah, the guidelines.
Yeah, we use the guidelines, and then we continually ask questions to develop those guidelines.
Or understand them,
to
or
understand
see
them.
how it works and what is the results of one way or another. Is it okay? Is not okay? That's why we have one half is to do, the other half is not to do. That's why it's divided that way.
Yep.
So we are
David,
learning every day.
Yes. Well, Rabbi, you said that there's no word in the Torah for obey. There's other things in there than you mentioned what those were. But aren't even the 10 commandments not even commandments? They're statements, because
Teachings.
right. And so they're kind, of course, if it's a statement and if it came from God, then we should obey it, but there's no word to obey it. So we should hear it, and then they're not,
Listen.
and there's not really commandments. So it's a whole very, not a dichotomy. It's
The
a
people
whole
said
interesting thing.
Naaseh v'nishma. We were going to try it and we're going to follow it. That's exactly what they answered. Naaseh, we'll do it, v'nishma, and let's hear what happened when we did it. It was a learning experience the whole time.
So we do, David, we do have the word mitzvah in, right? There's 613 mitzvot
Right.
commandments, right? And when a child becomes b'nei mitzvah, they become a child of the commandments. So that word is used, right? So there is the idea of a commandment, but even a command is slightly different than obey, right? You must obey, right? It's still a guideline. And then we have the responsibility of interpreting it, figuring out how we're going to actually apply it in our lives. Okay, we're almost at the end. I just want to point out a couple of other things that I always like to be reminded of with Passover. First is the idea of getting rid of our chametz. Some people take that very seriously in terms of literally getting rid of all the chametz in their house, but regardless of the level and degree to which you get rid of your chametz, physical chametz, the rabbis do link the idea of chametz to this idea of puffed up, right? The puffed up nature, that what we are also supposed to be doing for the 8 days of Pesach is to remove the things that puff ourselves up. In other words, a focus on the ego, a focus on success, on personal success. We're supposed to move away from that. We're supposed to remove those things from our identity, at least for a week. And I think the goal, the way I understand it, is if you can do that for a week, you start to slowly remove it more and more in other parts of your lives, right? It's supposed to kind of reset. It's almost like, just like we have, Yom Kippur, which is a reset for the year, Pesach is almost like a humility reset, where we're supposed to really go back to this idea of what does it mean to be humble? What does it mean to remove the ego as the centerpiece of how we identify ourselves or how we respond in the world, and how can we remove that? Have a different focus. So I really, in terms of the chametz piece, and then of course the idea, as many of you are probably already aware, right, of Mitzrayim, of not only being Egypt but also being defined as the narrow place, right? That the entire story of what it means to go from Mitzrayim to a promised land is to figure out a way in which we are supposed to leave a narrow place in our lives, however you want to define that, into a more expansive place. And that in order to do that, we have to go through a wilderness, which is scary and disorienting. But that is part of the process. And the goal, of course, as with the story of Passover, is that we will ultimately then get to a promised land of some sorts, right? But this idea that this is also a holiday to really, for us to be thinking about spiritually and emotionally, what are the narrow places? Where are we narrowly seeing the world? Where are we feeling constricted? And what can we do to try and take those steps into that water of the unknown of the Red Sea, and hope that it will part and allow us to go to a place of more freedom and more opportunity. So with that, I want to wish all of you a Chag Sameach. I hope you have a meaningful Passover, and Shabbat Shalom as well. And great to be with all of you as always.
Great.
So
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
Shalom, Hag Sameach. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Chag Sameach, thank you.
Bye.
You are a remarkable person.